So that is, all right, so we have this is the spinal cord, even though it doesn't look like it. This is the spinal cord, right? And you have how many, well, first of all, the somatic nervous system, what does it control?
The skeletal muscles and
Skeletal muscle.
senses.
Skeletal muscle, that's it.
Okay.
So it just controls your skeletal muscle. How many neurons go from the spinal cord to the skeletal muscle in the somatic nervous system? One. So how many go in the autonomic nervous system, the automatic systems? How many have we been talking about? 2. Because you have the preganglionic and the postganglionic. So that's so in the somatic nervous system, skeletal muscle, it goes straight from your spinal cord or your brain to the skeletal muscle. There's no stops in between. In the autonomic nervous system, you have your spinal cord, and you have one nerve that goes to wherever it goes to, and then it enters a ganglion. It's kind of like a rest stop, and then it connects with another, and it goes out to whatever gland or smooth muscle you're talking about. So when you're talking about pre and post ganglionic, it's literally talking about which neuron is in front of the ganglion, which neuron goes into the ganglion, which neuron comes out.
Okay.
If I sound like I'm shouting, I'm trying to let the video hear me. Yeah, so it's literally just all about this ganglion and which one is going into it and which one's going out. So that's all the pre and post ganglionic is talking about, so it's not anything extravagantly confusing.
So the autonomic is the one that goes to the ganglion, or do
So the autonomic nervous system, alright, so the autonomic nervous system as a whole. So your nervous system, let's do this. Let's make a little flowchart. I love flowcharts. So I have the nervous system, right? Nervous system. Now I have 2 branches of the nervous system, right? We just talked about them. What are they?
Sympathetic and parasympathetic?
No, that's too specific.
they?
More
It's the
general.
autonomic and the
Somatic.
Somatic, yeah. So I've got somatic over here. Somatic and autonomic, right? So we talked about the somatic controls skeletal muscle. So we only have 2 branches, right? And the somatic only controls skeletal muscle. What does the autonomic control?
Is that sympathetic and parasympathetic? The autonomic?
The autonomic, yeah, but I'm talking about in your body. Like, what is it?
Oh,
Your
What are-
your smooth muscle, cardiac muscle.
Yeah.
That's
So everything else.
okay.
All of the automatic things, so autonomic and automatic, so things that you don't have to consciously think about, like your heartbeat, your breathing, your digestive system, because we don't want to have to process that. If we had to process that, we'd literally just sit there and exist, and we'd do nothing, and we'd probably die because we wouldn't be able to find food. So the autonomic system controls automatic processes.
So you're involuntary.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And he'll use like involuntary, automatic, visceral. Those are all the same things when we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. So we've already covered that. That was what we ended on in Anatomy 1. So we don't care about the somatic nervous system right now. Just focusing on the autonomic. So then what are the 2 branches of the autonomic?
Sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Yeah. Sympathetic and
Third time's the
parasympathetic.
charm, finally right.
We'll get it. We'll get it.
I sure hope so. It's gonna be a long semester if I don't.
The first part of Anatomy 2, the endocrine and the ANS, are the most difficult parts.
Okay.
So after this, it gets easier. least in my opinion. Because after this, hold on, sympathetic. After this, you can see everything that you're talking about, and you can point to it on your body.
Okay.
So, like you can't see this in your body. You can't point to it. You can't look up dissections. I mean, you can for some of the things, but it's just kind of difficult because these are like ambiguous concepts. But all right, so we've got the parasympathetic, and then we've got the sympathetic. So, which one's fight or flight?
Sympathetic.
Sympathetic. So, the way that I think of
Oh yeah, stress. You just said that.
stress, yeah. I also think so stress and sympathetic. I'll put stress down here too. And then parasympathetic is your rest and digest. It's the opposite. And I think parasympathetic and peace. Because when your parasympathetic division is, when you're resting, you're peaceful, you're just chilling, you're reading a good book, you're eating dinner.
You're de-stressing.
Eating dinner with someone you like, not someone you don't like, because that's a whole different story. So the whole thing with the division of the nervous system is balance. So it's complementing each other. So like you put the yin yang symbol on the intro
Yeah.
PowerPoint. That's basically what all these divisions in the nervous system are doing, is they're balancing each other. So we can control the somatic, and then since we can't control anything else, we have to have something to balance and control everything. So our autonomic nervous system controls everything that we don't think about. And then down here, we have ways to cope with being at peace, and we have ways to cope with stress. So it's just kind of, they kick in different things. So imagine that my mom tells this story because she taught me anatomy in high school. So my mom tells the story, she just moved out to Florida, and she was really young, and she was walking her dog, right? And by a lake. She lived in Wisconsin her whole life, so she had no idea there were alligators in every lake, and that alligators love dogs. So she's walking her dog, and her dog and her are standing by the lake, and my mom's like, oh look, there's an alligator out there. And she's watching it, and it's kind of like creeping closer and closer, and she's like, look at it, it's cool.
Oh my gosh.
And then all of a sudden it disappears, and she's like, where did it go? And they're on this dock, right? And they're on this dock that's kind of floating out in the water. Well, the dock starts sinking, and this alligator's gone. My mom's like, what the heck? So the dock starts sinking, and all of a sudden this alligator comes like rushing out of the water at her and her dog. And my mom, her sympathetic nervous system kicked in full blast, and time slowed down. Her heart rate sped up, and she have you ever been in a situation where you like see red? You're so terrified. Yeah, and she with strength that she didn't imagine she had, she leaped up this muddy bank, dragged her dog with her, and outran this gator.
Oh my god.
But that's what the sympathetic nervous system does. It kicks everything up so that you can get all that stored energy that you have out in one big burst.
So your adrenaline kicks in.
Exactly. Yep. Your adrenaline, your norepinephrine, they're the same thing.
Yep.
So your heart rate goes up, your everything you need to flee kicks in full gear, and everything you don't need goes down. So like your digestion slows down. And so that's why, you feel like you have a stomach ache after you've been stressed, like really stressed, because nothing digested. So you just have food sitting in there that didn't get digested. Your body's upset. So that's why we have these two divisions. And we don't always need to fight a bear off or run from an alligator. So we have to have something to bring our heart rate down, because if your heart rate is super high, if the sympathetic nervous system was the only thing controlling your heart rate would go through the roof until it burst. And if your parasympathetic was the only thing controlling your heart, it would go down until you passed out and died. basics, and then you guys can fill in some of the blanks with whatever you need at home. But there is one. So he was talking about the receptors and stuff, and the ACH. Yeah. So, all right. So in the, let me see. Oh, I have this written down somewhere. I have to see this in a chart. Okay. So in the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, remember we have two neurons, right? And they need to communicate with each other. So how do neurons communicate? What's their signal they send out? What's it called? Like the general word. Use neurotransmitters, right?
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, so they use neurotransmitters. So there's two neurons, right? One of them has a long preganglionic neuron. One of them has a long postganglionic neuron. Does anyone remember which one is which?
Isn't? Wait, no, never mind. I'm thinking of mine and stuff.
So the parasympathetic, I'm just gonna write para. The parasympathetic has a long preganglionic neuron and a short postganglionic neuron. So remember, this is the one that is oftentimes inside of the gland or whatever it is innervating. So this ganglion, this one is so long that it's either really, really, really close to the gland or it's inside the gland itself. And then this little neuron is just the little extra length to get to the specific part. That was weird. The specific place that it needs to communicate with. And then the sympathetic is the opposite. It has a short preganglionic neuron and a long postganglionic neuron. So those are annoyingly difficult, like annoyingly confusing things, but they're unfortunately really important to remember. So, yeah, go ahead.
Is it because the neuron need to communicate faster in sympathetic?
So yeah, so the sympathetic is the one it's branched out a lot, and that gives it, so it's got all these other connections on this little guy, and it allows it to talk to a lot of other neurons really, really fast.
Quickly? Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause it's
So
pathway.
yeah, so that's why, like,
Gotcha.
you know, your stress levels can go through the roof immediately,
Right.
and then it takes a lot longer to calm down.
Calm down.
Because if you were super stressed and your heart was pumping a lot, and then all of a sudden your heart rate just went down completely, your blood pressure would still be through the roof, but your heart wouldn't be beating as fast, and your body would just be completely out of whack and out of homeostasis, and you'd probably pass out. You'd hurt yourself a lot. So, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So the parasympathetic has a long preganglionic.
Yeah, so the parasympathetic has a long preganglionic and a short postganglionic.
And then the sympathetic has a short preganglionic
Mhm.
and it has a long post.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just opposites. So they're always opposite in everything, basically. Except for the neurotransmitters. So there's one. So what's the transmitter that we've heard most often? ACH. Yeah. So there's four places where we need to release neurotransmitter, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only one place that doesn't release ACH. And what is it? What's released there instead?
Is it the norepinephrine?
Norepinephrine, yeah. So which one releases norepinephrine? Does anyone remember? It's the sympathetic, but which is it? The preganglionic or the postganglionic?
Isn't it the pre?
It's the post.
Post? Okay.
Excuse me. Yeah. So this one releases norepinephrine, and everything else releases ACH.
I know this is gonna be a really dumb question. It's just I always get the two confused.
You're good.
What exactly is norepinephrine? Because like I know epinephrine isn't that the one to get your like adrenaline going and stuff like if you.
That's something that I should know off the top of my head.
I'm sorry.
But no, it's okay.
I always think of the EpiPen.
Yeah, I mean, norepinephrine is adrenaline,
Mhm.
so I don't know. I'll have to actually look at it because I've never, like, actually looked up.
So
I
it's
mean,
the
I think it's on your.
norepinephrine?
I think it's on the.
Is it?
I think it's on the chart. Let me see.
Am I getting the two confused?
No, you're not. There is norepinephrine and there is epinephrine. So. Oh, they're both stimulatory.
Oh, they.
That makes
both are?
sense. Okay. That makes sense why I can't find a reason why one relaxes you. They're both stimulatory. And it just so happens that norepinephrine is the one that's released here. I don't know why. That's
Okay.
a biochemical answer.
Okay.
So that's
don't
only
know.
released in sympathetic.
In sympathetic, but the post-ganglionic neuron of the sympathetic nervous system. So it's super specific. You only see norepinephrine being released right here, right before the gland, or whatever it's going to.
Okay.
And everywhere else is ACH. So it's easier to memorize the exception. It's easier to memorize where the norepinephrine is than to memorize and then just assume everything else is ACH.
And that's postganglionic.
Postganglion neuron of the sympathetic division.
This is so much simpler.
Well, because I don't have to teach you guys all the terminology and the definitions and stuff. Like Dr. Saviak has to teach you everything in one foul swoop, and then once you've learned everything, I can come in. I can simplify it a little bit. He doesn't have that luxury. But yeah, I like simplifying things because this is really like a difficult concept because you can't see it and it's weird, but it's really not as bad as it seems when you first start out. When you first start out, it's just a ton of information, a ton of words, but it's not bad. So what do we call a receptor that responds to ACH?
I know we talked about receptors, but I just can't remember.
So they're called cholinergic.
Oh, I have that in my notes right here.
Cholinergic. And then, does anyone remember what the receptors that respond to norepinephrine are called?
Adrenergic.
Adrenergic, yep. And why, you remember why they're called adrenergic?
Something with the. All I know is adrenergic. I associated that with adrenaline.
Yeah, because norepinephrine used to be called adrenaline until about 20 years ago when they decided to change the name. So it's apparently a biochemical thing. It's apparently formula is more norepinephrine than adrenaline. Who cares? So yeah, so if a receptor responds to ACH, it is cholinergic. And if a receptor responds to norepinephrine, it is adrenergic.
Can you repeat that? If what?
If a receptor responds to ACH, it's cholinergic.
Okay. And if the receptor responds to norepinephrine, it's that word.
Yep, adrenergic. So like adrenaline.
And those are called receptors, and the other ones are the neurotransmitters, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, exactly. So, and then obviously you'd only find adrenergic receptors where?
Postganglionic.
Postganglion is like the sympathetic.
Exactly. And then everywhere else, which one would you find?
And the
The pre or post of the
Pre.
para, the pre of the sympathetic, and both in the parasympathetic.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, and they're all cholinergic. Yep, I know you guys can see it, I just want you to say it because you'll
Yeah.
remember it better. Yeah, so those are the basic, I don't think I want to delve too deeply right now into there's more subdivisions of the cholinergic and the adrenergic receptors, but I don't think I want to get too deep into that because you guys haven't heard that lecture yet.
Oh, okay.
So I'll do that, we'll go over that some other time. Oh. What was I thinking? Alright, hold on, I have some more notes. That's,
ACH and norepinephrine.
yeah.
Just so I can differentiate all these things.
Mm-hmm. This is going back to A&P I. I want to make sure, what's the difference? So what is an afferent neuron? What's an efferent neuron?
Oh god.
I remember that, but I got that
Huh.
somewhere. The efferent is a single lower motor neuron. Is that what you want?
It's a little bit specific, but the answer's in there. So efferent neuron is a general term for, it's talking about efferent and afferent are talking about the direction. So one is sensory, one is motor.
Oh, right there, see?
Yeah, so which one is which?
I'm just gonna take this. Is efferent sensory?
It's motor. So yeah, so the way I think about it is, so you have a path, right? That, so in order to sense something, it's the hot stove analogy. You put your hand on a stove, and you have to sense it first. So you have to send a signal up to to wherever, like your spinal cord, if it's a reflex. Send a signal to your spinal cord, and then you have to process it. Then you have to send it back out. So the nerve that goes from your hand to your spinal cord is the afferent nerve. It's the sensory nerve. And then the one going out is the efferent or motor nerve. So I think of afferent, because I had so much trouble remembering these, but A is the first letter in the alphabet, so it happens first. And then efferent is E for exit.
Back out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, just a general little, in case because he'll use afferent and efferent together with other words. You might as well not be confused about what those mean. Because that doesn't go away.
Just like the potassium gates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
Oh,
sodium
so
potassium
I thought we
gates.
were done, and then he mentioned them last week, and I was like, no.
Is that a confusing thing?
Always.
Should we go over that again? Just the general
Yeah, the general.
sodium potassium gates?
Yeah, because I'm gonna be honest, I took A&P I in 2015.
Okay. Wow, you're right. Awesome.
Listen, I'm just stuck in, I can't get it out of my head. All I remember him going,
Yeah.
He was
The
just so
whole
mad at
lecture,
her.
I'm like, oh,
You
God,
guys
I remember
are
him
mad.
talking
He's like,
about it, but I remember nothing about it.
Okay, so we'll go over the sodium potassium gates. Does anyone need this? I'm gonna erase this. No? Okay. It's going away. Alright, so sodium potassium gates are fun.
Lies.
I like it. Okay, so we have our cell, right? And it needs to be stimulated in some way. So we have some channels, and we have some pumps. Oh gosh. All right, so we've got two things that are two ions, right? They're sodium, potassium. So which one do you find outside the cell when it's resting? Which one do you find in the cell?
Sodium is outside, potassium is inside.
Yep. And then the cell is stimulated and they're gonna switch, right? What's that stimulation called? When they switch?
Depolarization.
Depolarization, yeah. So they're depolarized and the potassium goes out and the sodium goes in, right? So the way that I remember which one goes out and which one goes in, because you have 3 in and 2 out, right? Because your cell was more negative with the potassium. There was just less positive inside the cell, so it was negative. So now you want to make it, if you're depolarizing, it means you're switching, you're flipping. So you want to make it positive. So you're going to pump 3 sodium's in, and it has 1, 2, 3 characters. And potassium has 2 characters, so you're gonna pump 2 out. I struggled with the sodium potassium pump literally into AP2 until I figured this out.
So when
And
the
that's it.
polarization happens, you're making it more positive inside?
Yep, you're flipping. So on a graph, it looks like, so your cell, so this is 0, and this is threshold. So your cell is negative, then all of a sudden it's positive, and then all of a sudden it's back down to negative. So it's resting, all of a sudden it's stimulated, boom, positive goes way up. Your positive ions inside of the cell go way up. And then you repolarize, you reset, and everything goes back down to normal. And that's it.
So in this case, is polarization a thing, or is it repolarizing? Are they
It's
the
both.
same thing?
Yeah, they're the same thing.
Okay.
Repolarization, polarization are the same thing.
And then it would just be the opposite of depolarization,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah. Yeah, so you can think of the poles on each part of the planet, on each top and bottom of the planet. They're far apart. So you want to push the ions back apart. So it's an uncomfortable thought of the poles coming in and out.
And then just so that it sticks,
Mhm.
polarization is when the sodium comes back out and the potassium comes back in.
Yep. Because it all has to reset eventually. Yeah, so the sodium potassium gates come back with a vengeance in the cardiovascular system. And then you add stuff to it. You add more ions. So
depolarization.
Yeah, but can we repeat that one
Yeah, one
more
more time.
time?
Depolarization.
Okay, yeah.
Potassium out, sodium in.
mhm.
And
Polarization.
Sodium in, potassium out.
Mhm. Yep.
And depolarization is making it into positive in the inside.
Exactly.
And then polarization is making the inside negative.
Mhm.
Is this the stuff with the little golf club looking thing? With when it carries the thing, or is that something else?
No, you're talking about the muscles. How
Oh.
muscles contract.
Oh, okay, never mind.
But it's got sodium and potassium.
okay,
in it?
that's probably what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's got it. There were sodium potassium gates involved in that,
Mhm.
so you're on a similar track.
Oh, this is connected to something.
Mhm.
Okay.
No, it's connected. I can see where that came from.
Okay.
All right. So one random piece of information to add to all the other random pieces of information. It's really small, I promise. So remember how one of the ganglions was really, really close to
Sympathetic.
yeah, the parasympathetic. Because it had the
Oh,
short,
yeah.
short post. And I mentioned that this ganglion was inside the gland sometimes. It's called intramural. So there's two words that are two medical prefixes that are super similar, but if you can get them straight, they make life a lot easier. So intra means within, and inside, yeah. And inter means between. So intracellular fluid is fluid inside the cell, and intercellular fluid is fluid between the cells. So I know it's a random thing, but it actually helps more than you think to know the difference, because it helps you figure out where you're looking at. Are you looking at inside something, or are you looking outside something?
I'm sorry. So what does this have to connect with what I just want to
Yeah.
put two and two together.
So this little ganglion in the parasympathetic nervous system is, if it's inside the gland or the effector, it's called an intramural.
Oh, okay.
Intramural ganglion. So I use that as a segue. Give you a random piece of information. There's still water in between them.
They're touching, but there's space.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's fluid inside the cells, which is intracellular.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And that helps in biology too. If you have to take biology.
Oh, I'm taking biology right
Yeah?
now. Yes.
Who's your professor?
Ruth.
Oh, I took Bruce. Took him last semester.
I
Yeah.
have him.
He was good. So, any questions? I know I gave you guys a lot of information.
No, you made everything so much simpler.
Good.
Yeah, I understand potassium needs potassium and sodium.
Yeah.
Good.
I understand the whole nervous system.
Good.
Because he's up there and he goes between both, so I'm just like,
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. It can, like I said, lecture for these two, the first two chapters can be kind of daunting because you've just got so much information. You can't see anything you're talking about, so it's just words on paper, and it's not like, you can't draw a picture of the nervous system because you'd have nothing. It'd just be little lines on your human's body. So, yeah, it's a little bit daunting, like I said, but this is the worst of it. It gets better, at least in my opinion.
The
It gets
same-
more fun.
yeah, the same thing happened in A&P I,
Mhm.
where I just sat there and I was like, but near the end it was more, like I
Yeah.
understood it.
Well, and after all this, you've got the background knowledge to tackle like the cardiovascular system and the pulmonary system, which are really fun because it's all things that like you can see hearts and blood vessels. You can feel your heart beating. You can feel your pulse. Like it's things that you can actually touch inside, like, and point to inside your body. So it makes it a lot more concrete and a lot more applicable in your mind, and it's just fun. And by the end of A&P II, you have a whole basic understanding. You've got the basic concepts, all of them down, and you can say you completed A&P II, which is in itself boasting rights, so that you did the whole A&P sequence. So, all right. Any other questions or things that were confusing? I don't want to overwhelm you guys with a lot of information.
Dumb it down for me.
Me too.
Did I make it better?
I have
Okay.
one more stupid question.
Yeah, go
What's
ahead.
the point of the sodium potassium gates? Like, what's the overall, like, I know it's to make the cell like positive and negative, but
Mhm.
what is like what's an example of what happens in the body where it needs to do that? So I can kind of like visualize why it happens.
Yeah. So,
Kind of a dumb question,
So
probably.
no, it's not a dumb question. Actually, it relates a lot to what we're talking about because it is the nervous system. It's how the nervous system communicates.
Okay.
So, let me find a place to draw a picture here. I'm just gonna put it over here. So you have a neuron, right? And it has its axon, and it has to send a signal down to another neuron, right? So neurons use electricity to send signals. So there's little electrical pulses, and it's pretty cool. I like it. So these positive and negative charges. So you have a bunch of positive outside the cell. Well, it's waiting. You have a bunch of negative inside. So right now, an electrical signal can't move, but when you depolarize it and you flip it, that change in charge allows the electricity to travel to
Okay.
one more pump,
Okay.
and then the next pump flips and it travels again. So because literally positive and negative, as in like a battery, positive and negative charges.
So, the sodium and potassium gates are what allows us to send the signals?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. That's pretty much, if you wanna send a signal to another cell, you use a sodium potassium gate, because it's electricity. So I think it's pretty cool. There's electricity going through your body all the time. I just like this stuff way too
Is
much,
that
I
why you
think.
get shocked?
Stupid question, but
Well, no, but your body is a conductor. So like you can conduct electricity. So like plastic isn't able to conduct electricity. Electricity can't pass through it, but electricity can pass through our bodies. Because we have to, otherwise we wouldn't be able to send signals. So our bodies have to be conductors of electricity in order to live, in order to send signals.
Oh, so we're conductors, that way we can do that, but
Mhm.
we don't get shocked because of that, we get shocked because we are conductors.
Yes, we get shocked because we have the capability to have electricity within us. We just shouldn't have that much. And if we get shocked by like an outlet, it's way too much. And it's not like the tiny baby signals that are going, because these are measured in like millivolts. And then when you stick your finger in an outlet that's in volts, that's way too much.
Yeah.
It's like literally thousands of times more than you should have. So.
I'm so happy you literally make me feel so smart.
Well, because it's really, I mean, it's like I said, it's a lot, and it's really not that difficult when you dumb it down, when you think about it. And like I said, now that you have the basics, so what I do when I study is even if I know the basics, I go back to the very basics, and I go back way to the beginning of the content. So if I was doing the nervous system and I was studying it for a test, I would go back I'd go back up here to the nervous system, and I would start my notes or my flow chart. I'd probably do a flow chart because I'm a visual learner. So I'd start my flow chart with the nervous system, even though I know that we have a nervous system, and then I'd divide it into somatic and autonomic, even though I know that those exist. I just need to, and then you divide it further and you take notes, and eventually you get to the spots where you don't know what you're talking about, and then you can look back at previous things and things that you did know, and you can kind of relate those back to what you don't know and figure it out. And it cements the basics in your mind, because the basics trip people up a lot. And if you miss the basics on the test, you're like, oh my gosh, how did I miss that? But yeah, it's generally a good idea to start from the very, very beginning, even if you know it. And list all the things that you do know, because then you feel better about yourself.
Yeah.
Like seriously, you feel better about yourself if you have if you have a list of things that you do know, and then all of a sudden you get to something you don't know, you're like, well, I know all this, so I'm not dying.
See, because when we're in lecture, I get confused. Like now I know, but like I would get confused with like the neurotransmitters and then the receptors, what's what, and then I think the flow chart really just kind of
Yeah.
helps separate everything so I can look at what's what.
Yeah. Like I said, I love flowcharts, and I draw pictures when I study. So I draw pictures like when I did the heart, drew a picture of the heart, the blood vessels. I drew all the blood vessels, and you can trace the blood vessels on your body too. And that's fun. So I did that in the car on the way to work. I was like, I look really weird.
They look at
Tracy,
you?
huh?
Did they look at you?
No, I'm sure not, but I'm like, I was like self-conscious for no reason. Like tracing all the blood vessels, like where are they going? Oh, I have to drive. All right, but if there's no more questions, that's it. Y'all are free to stay as long as you want. You don't have to leave.
Do we have to sign in?
Yes, I've been holding you hostage. There you
I was
go.
wondering how we
You
like
turn
got
on.
credit for coming. I was like, I don't think she knows my name.